Hey, Rick Chapo here with DMCAAgentService.com. Just cutting a quick video on the big news of the day. Yes, the EU has passed the controversial copyright directive. So today is March 26, 2019, and we had the EU Parliament vote. This is the final vote. It's either yay or nay, and it was yay. And so the vote was 348 votes for, 274 votes against, and 36 abstentions. And so the question, of course, is, well, now what? And the answer is nothing's going to change today. And nothing will change for the next month, at least, because we need to understand the difference between a different directive and a regulation in the EU. A regulation is a piece of legislation that, when it is enacted, it is immediately binding on the member states, and they must follow it. So an example would be the GDPR. It was passed in 2016, but the effective date was May 25th, 2018. And so when that May date hit, the GDPR was immediately binding on the EU member states. The EU member states did have to pass some supporting legislation on small issues, but generally they were bound by the GDPR and they need to comply with it. Now, a directive is a different matter entirely. A directive is more like a set of themes that are put forth and passed, and then each member state must go ahead and enact its own laws that incorporate those themes. Now, the themes can be pretty specific, but in this case, they're not. They're fairly vague. And the reason for that is that the parties who were in favor of this directive were having great difficulty getting enough votes to get it passed. And so they kept having to back off of what they wanted. The language got more and more vague so that they could pick up enough votes, to win. And so we end up with a lot of language in the directive that is just awful from a legal perspective. Courts are going to have a heyday with it. Attorneys are going to have a heyday with it. We have things like companies shall use best efforts or best practices. And, what does that mean? And it's difficult to say, what's the difference between a best effort and a pretty good effort? Who knows? But I can guarantee you we're going to spend millions and millions and millions of dollars in legal fees arguing about it for the next decade or two. So however you feel about the copyright issue, this directive was really not a very good approach. They should have probably scrapped it and taken a different approach to try to give us something that would actually be more useful. But they didn't. And so here we are. And finally, this is another example of the splinternet in action. If you don't know what the splinternet is, I'd encourage you to go take a look at it, because the internet is basically starting to fracture a bit. That sounds very dramatic. It's probably not that dramatic. But what we're seeing is the worldwide internet is actually becoming a bit more fragmented, because different jurisdictions are taking different approaches to different topics, and those often conflict, leaving businesses and individuals with scenarios where maybe they don't get the information that they think they should get. So, for instance, with the GDPR, a lot of U.S. newspapers now block the EU. So if you're in the EU, you're a European citizen, you want to read the Los Angeles Times, you can't. And so that's a limitation of free speech. And with copyright, the EU has taken a position that differs from most other countries in the world. So this is going to conflict with China, the US, Russia, India. And so it's going to be interesting to see how all that plays out. But the EU's effort to charge ahead with making so many radical changes to the internet certainly is putting it at risk of potentially becoming a backwater online. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And if you're interested in those kinds of concepts, the splinternet is something you definitely want to understand and watch, because it's fascinating to see all of this move forward. But anyways, back to the big news of the day. The EU passes a controversial copyright directive, and now we see what the member states do. So thanks for watching. Have yourself a good one.